And now the Deeper Thinking podcast, a daily exploration into how philosophy, psychology, and technology shape how we think, feel, and live.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. You are not at the centre, nor is the artist, nor is the reader. The centre has shifted, if it ever existed at all. What remains is the manifold, the trembling, uneven texture of other lives, half seen and fully felt. Against the myths of heroic agency, romantic self-expression, or the totalizing grip of ideology, a quieter struggle persists, the attempt to let another person be, not to explain them, not to symbolize them, but to regard them as they are, resistant, contingent, and real. This is not humility, it is discipline, a moral discipline disguised as aesthetic form. Iris Murdoch knew this. She saw the novel not as a mirror to hold up to the self, but as a house built large enough for others to live in. To write, then, is not merely to express, it is to bear witness, not to truth, but to presence, not to the universal, but to the particular that refuses containment. What looks like literary style is in fact ethical attention, the refusal to reduce, the willingness to remain beside. The sublime, as Murdoch repositions it, is not the triumph of reason over the formless. It is the invitation to remain undone by what exceeds us. In the best prose, we do not find the author, we find someone else. Not myth, but multiplicity. Not closure, but regard. In a world increasingly shaped by platforms that reward certainty, spectacle, and compression, the kind of vision Murdoch asks of us feels almost subversive. Her call is not for more opinion, more brilliance, or more narrative force, but for more patience, more moral quiet, more room. The novel in her hands is not a site of display, but of surrender. The writer's ego gently set aside, the character allowed to live without being mined for meaning. This refusal to possess, to reduce another to symbol, case study, or metaphor, is the real mark of artistic greatness, and yet it's so easy to miss. What often gets praised as psychological realism or formal mastery may in fact be something more radical, the act of unknowing done faithfully over time. To write this way is to let contradiction breathe, to allow awkwardness, silence, even opacity, not as a gesture of ambiguity, but as an ethic of attention. And this attention, long, slow, non-possessive, is not just a literary device. It is a form of love, not the sentimental kind, nor the idealized, but the one that stays, the one that looks again and again until it sees not what it wanted, but what is there. What Murdoch offers is not a theory of fiction, but a vision of moral life enacted through prose. The danger, she warns, lies in letting ideology or aestheticism override the reality of the person. When a character becomes a vehicle for an idea, for a worldview, even for emotional effect, they cease to be real. And once that happens, something vital is lost, the possibility of being surprised by another human being. Great novels preserve this possibility. They do not resolve contradiction, they house it. They do not seek clarity, they allow texture. In this way, fiction becomes a kind of training ground for moral perception, where the reader is asked not to judge, not to master, but to attend. And attending is slow. It resists summary. It asks the reader to remain, even when the arc is unclear, even when the character does not change in a satisfying way. This is where the sublime enters, not as a storm or a spectacle, but as the quiet recognition that another life exceeds your grasp, that you do not know what they mean, that you may never. And still, you stay. That, Murdoch suggests, is the beginning of the moral life, not knowing, but looking, again and differently. This is why Murdoch defends the novel with such care. It is one of the few forms capacious enough to hold moral reality without distorting it. Where philosophy abstracts and drama resolves, the novel lingers. It allows time to stretch and contradiction to breathe. It does not require that people become types or that stories deliver catharsis. Instead, it invites us into a world where freedom is defined not by choice, but by recognition. The recognition that others exist, that they think and suffer and carry meanings we will never fully know, and that this, not mastery, not certainty, is the ground of love. To write a character well, Murdoch insists, is not to build them like a clockwork model or speak them into eloquence. It is to meet them with the same patience and moral seriousness one would bring to a friend or a stranger. The good novelist disappears, not into the text, but behind it. They clear the way. They let us see. And in seeing, if we are lucky, we are changed. Not into better selves, perhaps, but into selves that are softer, more porous, less eager to possess. Fiction becomes not a mirror, but a door, and love, in its truest sense, what waits on the other side. In Murdoch's ethic, the enemy is not failure, but fantasy, particularly the fantasy of understanding too quickly. This temptation is everywhere, in moral argument, in cultural critique, in the rush to pin a character down. But the best fiction, she teaches, moves in the opposite direction. It slows the reader, clouds certainty, and withholds the very clarity we think we want. Not to confuse, but to cleanse. Not to obscure, but to clear space for reality, unfiltered by self-concern. What makes this kind of writing rare is not the depth of its intellect, but the precision of its regard. It looks not for the right answer, but for the exact shape of the moment before one is imposed. And this moment, tender, unresolved, often silent, is where the real moral work begins. In fiction, that work might look like a gesture left unfinished, a sentence interrupted, a thought that trails into doubt. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of care. Murdoch's greatest insight is that style is never neutral. How we write reveals how we see, and how we see, especially when we do not claim to know, can become an act of moral imagination. To write well, in Murdoch's sense, is not to dazzle with insight, but to empty the self enough that something other might appear. Not inspiration, not invention, attention. And attention truly given transforms the page into something hospitable, a place where otherness can survive. This is not achieved through cleverness, but through renunciation. The renunciation of control, of certainty, of the desire to use. In this light, the novelist is not a creator in the divine sense, but a witness, someone who watches with care and does not interrupt too soon. This witnessing does not excuse inaction or moral vagueness. On the contrary, it demands a stronger ethic, one that insists on fidelity to the real, even when the real is unsatisfying, slow, or opaque. The sublime, then, is not only aesthetic, but relational. It emerges in those moments when we stop demanding meaning and begin making space. That space is the work of love, not as a theme, but as a structural ethic, a way of writing and of being that resists dominance in favour of dwelling. The novel becomes not a stage, but a room, and to read it well is not to find ourselves, but to lose ourselves, gently in the presence of someone else. This, finally, is what Murdoch offers. A vision of literature not as message, but as moral method. Not a way to express the self, but a way to decenter it. Not a vehicle for ideas, but a dwelling for persons. The task of the novelist, then, is not to resolve complexity, but to host it, to remain in relationship with what cannot be fully known, to resist the urge to interpret too quickly, to explain too neatly, or to move on too soon. In this vision, art is not separate from life. It is a continuation of the moral effort to regard others justly, and this regard to be real must be costly. It must ask of the writer not only craft, but character, not only vision, but vulnerability, to make room again and again for what is not them. And the reward? Not power, not certainty, but a different kind of clarity, the kind that comes when you stay with someone long enough to realise you don't understand them and choose still to stay. That is what Murdoch means by love. Not a feeling, not a theme, but an ethic, lived through form and given to the reader not as truth, but as offering. To end, if this is an ending at all, is not to conclude, but to leave the door ajar. The moral life, as Murdoch understands it, is not marked by resolution, but by return, again and again, to the same difficult task, to see clearly, without possession. And so the novel, when it succeeds, does not finish with a statement. It ends with a gesture, a kind of turning outward. The reader is not released, but quietly handed something to carry. Not an answer, but a way of attending, a way of dwelling beside. And this is perhaps the most radical gift of all, that art can teach us, without demanding, to love without needing to understand. To write in this mode is to forego brilliance in favour of clarity, ego in favour of hospitality. It is to trust that what matters most cannot be stated, only approached. And to trust too that someone, reader, stranger, other, will meet you in that unfinished space, not to complete it, just to remain. The novel, then, becomes not an act of expression, but of devotion. And devotion in its purest form does not end, it simply continues quietly, attentively, beside. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.